All right, welcome to your Unit 1 Key Points tutorial. Lesson 1.01 from Lessons About the Work of a Geographer. So, what is geography? Geography is the study of places and the relationships between people and their environments. So, how people are affected by their environment and how they affect their environment in turn. Geographers look at where things are, why they are there, and how they develop and change over time. Geographers study physical geography and human geography. Physical geography refers to the physical properties of the Earth's surface, like mountains, valleys, rivers, etc. Here we're looking at like natural features, the way that the Earth came naturally. Human geography studies the human societies that spread across the Earth. And it focuses on things like culture, like religion, like why human societies develop the way they do in the places that they do. Human geography really relates to what people, human beings, have done on the Earth. So you can think of physical geography as the natural environment, and human geography as like culture and what, how people affect their places. Geographers also study the connection between physical geography and human geography, and they call that connection human-environment interaction. This deals with how human culture interacts with the natural environment and the way that locations and places have had an impact on people. So, how do people adapt to their environments? How do they depend on their environments? And how do their environments shape their lives? Also, how do people modify their environments? Examples of physical geography include rocks, minerals, landforms, animals and plant life, soil, the climate, weather, rivers, oceans, the environment, the natural landscape, right? Examples of topics in human geography deal with population studies, settlements, looking at urbanization, the growth of cities. Human geographers study economic and political systems that develop in different places, transportation systems, and the cultural diffusion, the spread of ideas from one culture to another. They study migration, when people decide to leave the place where they were born and move somewhere else. We study social systems, recreation, what people do for fun, and religion and belief systems. Lesson 1.02 was on maps. Maps show visually where things are. There are two examples up on the slide. Geographers use and create maps to explain patterns and to explain how and why people and places are different. So we know that we use maps to find location, but you can also use maps to show data. And through this data, you can see patterns. For example, in this map over here on the top right, you can see visually, very easily, that the United States is one of the only countries in the whole world with no paid maternal leave. We're in very little company. This is a pattern that comes up because we've put it on this visual surface, this map. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to see that data. Same with this light pollution map. It shows you the pattern of where there is light pollution, and from that pattern, you can make inferences about where big cities are and how people live in different parts of the United States. There are two major categories of maps, and we're going to be looking at both of them. The first major kind of map is a reference map. Reference maps show location. They summarize the landscape and they are used to find a specific place, like Google Maps. There are two kinds of reference maps. Political maps relate to government. They show political boundaries, locations of countries, cities, states, towns, etc. And those locations are generally determined by people rather than nature. Like, there is no natural border here that shows where Texas stops and where Mexico begins. People decided that it was right here. As a result, political maps reflect human geography. They reflect decisions that people have made to shape their environment. The second kind of reference map is a physical map. Physical maps focus on geographic features like mountains, valleys, rivers, deserts, etc. Because they focus on the natural environment, physical maps are part of physical geography. And on the bottom here, you can see an example of physical map showing all of this topography, like mountain ranges here, green stuff over here. The second major category of maps, unlike reference maps, are thematic maps. Instead of using them to find a specific location like you would with a reference map, geographers use thematic maps to show data. Thematic maps focus on a specific theme or subject area connected with a specific geographic area. They can emphasize natural phenomena like climate or human characteristics like population density. And here we have a couple of examples. Right? Starting on the bottom over here, this is a thematic map that shows the number of cattle and calves sold in Maryland. So you wouldn't use this to find a location. You use this to find data about cows, if that's what you care about. The map in the middle is one that I found. It's very much more my style. Metal bands per 100,000 people. So you could use this map to show the data that of all the places in the world, Scandinavia, for some reason, has more metal bands than everybody else per 100,000 people. And you can see natural environment data reflected here in the Nobody Lives Here map, where everything in green contains zero population. So again, we have two reference maps. We have a physical map over here. Sorry, this one is the physical map. We have a political map over here of the United States of America. And we have a thematic map, very different, of cattle and calves sold in Maryland. Two more things on maps. Whether thematic or physical, most maps have keys that show the meaning of different symbols used in a map, and this would be the key on this map. Similarly, especially for reference maps, they tend to show scale. Scale shows how long a distance on the map would be in real life, and on this map, it would be over here at the very bottom. One thing to note about scale is maps are flat and the world is round, so sometimes they can distort scale. They can make it seem different than it is. For example, if you look over here, as it turns out, Alaska is actually a lot bigger than it looks over here. This map maker fixed that by putting a different scale in for Alaska, but still, a thing to note. All right, 1.03, the world map, and 1.04, physical and human geography. The world map consists of, at the most basic, 7 continents and a handful of oceans. The continents are determined by physical geography. They match like stuff in the earth. I don't have enough scientific knowledge to explain to you why the Earth's crust is the way that it is, but if you ask somebody who knows stuff about the Earth's crust, they can tell you why we have these 7 continents and why we split them where they are. We've got Africa, we have Antarctica, we have Asia, Oceania. Sometimes this is called Australia, sometimes it's called Oceania. There's 5. 5 is Europe, 6 over here is North America, and 7 over here is South America. In between, we have the Atlantic Ocean over here. We have the Pacific Ocean over here, and it shows up over here again because the Earth is round. Over here we have the Indian Ocean, named for India, right here. We have the Arctic Ocean, and we have the Southern Ocean. There are certain features of reference maps that make it possible for us to use them regularly and consistently. Reference maps use a system of latitude, that's these horizontal lines, and longitude, these vertical lines, to form a coordinate system to find specific locations. So if I knew the latitude number of this line and the longitude number of this line, I could find a specific place on the map. Reference maps also use cardinal directions to orient themselves. So north, south, west, and east. You can remember where west and east are because they spell a word if you have them in the right order. We also use the equator to divide the northern and southern hemispheres. The equator is right here. The northern hemisphere is up here, the southern hemisphere is down here, and the prime meridian to divide eastern hemisphere over here from the western hemisphere over here. The equator is probably the most important line of latitude because it's a great reference point and because it's hottest at the equator. So the farthest in latitude that you are, from the equator, the colder it'll be. The prime meridian is mostly helpful for determining what time zone you're in. So again, 7 continents, some oceans, here they are labeled. Physical and human geography. Like we said a minute ago, physical geography studies natural features and processes, landforms, topography, climate, natural resources. Human geography studies how societies in different regions vary or are different from each other. This includes studying things like economies and cultures. And culture can include all kinds of things, like religion, like food, like language, that sort of thing. Here's a great picture to remember what topography is. And here are the topics that sum up human geography. Human geography is influenced by physical geography in all kinds of ways. One way has to do with natural resources. The natural resources available in a region can affect how a society develops. For example, a society with ample farmland will develop a lifestyle designed around farming. A society with a lot of ocean around but not very much farmland will probably develop a society based on fishing. Similarly, topographical features, landforms, can make easier or facilitate or make harder or impede communication between different societies. For example, mountains and deserts and giant oceans historically isolated cultures from each other because they're really hard to cross. On the other hand, features like rivers tend to connect cultures together because they make things easy to cross and easier to carry. This promotes cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion is when cultures from one society spread to another. So rivers make that easier. Human geography can also influence physical geography. For example, when people cut down forests to clear room for farming, they have changed the physical geography of that location. Okay. Next, we are going to study climate. Climate is the study of temperature and weather patterns over long periods of time, very long periods of time. So for example, in Houston, it has snowed like twice. Snow is not part of our climate. If it is snowing today, that is our weather. Today, it might be snowing, but as a pattern, as a rule, it does not snow here. Our climate, especially now today, is hot and humid. Climate is affected by our region's location and by human activity. In terms of location, climate is most affected by our region's latitude, those horizontal lines across the Earth, of which the equator is the most important. The closer a location is to the equator, the more likely it is to have a climate with high temperatures because the sun hits there most directly. Historically, a region's climate determines its ability to cultivate different crops, to have agriculture, to farm things, to plant stuff in the ground and have it grow and eat it. This is key to human settlement. Temperate climates, climates that are not too hot and not too cold, that are conducive to agriculture, that make it easy to farm things, have historically attracted the most people because it's easier to survive if you can farm your food and because the weather's nicer. So areas of high population density, where there are the most people concentrated in the space, tend to be located between 20 degrees north and 60 degrees north of latitude. So that would be like right here-ish. This nice zone is where most early civilizations developed and where most people, at least in the early stages of history, lived. Other than temperate climates, we have tropical climates centered around the equator. And then at the very edges, we have Arctic and subarctic climates, really, really, really cold. So of these lines of latitude, number 2 would show the hottest location because it is on the equator. One thing to start thinking about too is like, how does a place's climate affect how people choose to live and where they choose to live and whether or not they choose to move somewhere else to migrate. So climate, to a large extent, determines human activity. We respond to our environment and live accordingly. But we have also affected climate with our human activity. Through industrialization, which was a period of time when people stopped making everything by hand and started using machines in factories that were powered mostly by coal, which is like an incredibly polluting source of energy. In doing that, we have polluted the Earth, causing global temperatures to rise. You would have heard this called global warming. And this is a process that's happened over the past 200 years and shows how human geography can affect physical geography, because literally we made machines and now it's like way hotter. And it's not just hotter, that heat shown on this map has all kinds of other effects on climate. Like we have so many hurricanes because the water here is a lot hotter than it used to be, and that is apparently really great for hurricanes. Next, we also invent technology to deal with the climate better, to better survive. Air conditioning, for example, means that the climate has less of an impact on human societies. Next, we're going to talk about cultural diffusion and isolation and human-environment interaction, focusing on natural resources. These are huge topics for social studies. So these are both key points that you're going to want to really be careful to remember the definitions. So first, topography. It's the arrangement of natural and artificial features on the Earth's surface. It is the lay of the land, like this stuff. Like I said a minute ago, historically, mountains, deserts, and giant bodies of water have led to cultural isolation because they make it difficult for distant societies to communicate. Like, do you want to walk across the desert? I don't. Neither did most people in history. On the other hand, rivers and trade networks lead to cultural diffusion. They make it possible for societies to connect and communicate and exchange ideas and technologies. Cultural diffusion is like a huge deal in social studies, so please learn what it means sooner rather than later. It refers to the spread of culture from one region to another, but it's not just culture, it's ideas, technologies, material things like stuff. Diseases, religions, all kinds of things. Cultural diffusion is what makes and changes history, almost as much as war does. And those are the two main things that we study in history. Through history, technologies have increasingly made it easier for people to communicate over long distances, which makes cultural diffusion happen more easily. For example, when people invented the wheel, they could move things farther. Then there was sailing, made things even easier. Then the railroad and the steam car and the steamboat, and then cars, and then telecommunications like the telegraph and telephone, and now the internet and flight. They've made it a lot easier for people, goods, and ideas to move around the world. Because it's easier for ideas and goods and diseases to move around the world, topographical features matter less in terms of keeping people apart. In other words, I don't care that there are mountains between us because I can just call you and not have to cross them. I can exchange my ideas with you without having to actually physically climb the mountain and then climb back down. And here are some examples of cultural diffusion. This one shows McDonald's diffusing throughout the earth. It's our proud American culture. More relevantly, here we see the spread of Christianity in the Roman Empire across a body of water that people could cross, but also mostly through trade networks. And here we see early trade networks connecting some, but not all, of the river valley civilizations. Moving on to talk about human-environment interaction, focusing on natural resources. Natural resources are key to human development, and they are the valued elements of the environment. This includes the raw materials, another big vocabulary word that you do need to know, of minerals, water, vegetation, and soil. Humans consume natural resources of their region, using them to survive and also to construct technology. So natural resources can include water, it can include land, forests for the trees, precious metals, oil, animals, cowsies, natural gas, elements that are used to make other finished products. The search for natural resources drives human history, and competition over scarce resources leads to a lot of armed conflict that also drive human history. I said scarce. So scarcity means there's not enough. Natural resources are scarce, so they are only available in limited quantities. Because of that, people often have to work out how to live in places where natural resources are scarce. People deal with this scarcity by adapting to their environment or by modifying it, by changing it. Right? So if we live in a place where there's not very much water, we will use less water. We adapt to our environment. If we live in a place where there is no land to farm because there are forests everywhere, we can modify our environment by chopping down the forests and making farmland. This is not great for the environment, but it is a thing that people tend to do. When people modify the environment deliberately or on purpose, that is an example of how human geography can affect physical geography. All right, moving on to 1.9 on human environment interaction and natural resources again. So again, human environment interaction discusses how people adapt to, depend on, and modify their environment. It is the link between human and physical geography. So how people adapt to their environment, how they change their behavior to survive where they are, how they depend on their environment, how they use the place that they live to survive, and how they modify or change it. Here, for example, we see a picture of a hut built in the canopy of the Amazon forest. This is one way that people who live in this region have adapted to their environment. They can't stay on the ground because there are too many animals, insects, predators, so they have to live all the way at the top of the trees. Here is a picture of somebody from a culture, an island culture in the ocean, and what he's doing is actually fishing shark. So in order to survive, because there aren't very many resources, people from his tribe have to learn to go out on boats into the deep ocean, take this really long spear, and then jump hard enough to hit a shark, not miss, and kill it so that this guy doesn't die, but he can take the shark back and feed his family for a whole week. Two great examples. They come from a wonderful documentary series called The Human Planet that I highly recommend. These episodes are great. If you Google, you shall find. The wide consumption and varying distribution of natural resources shapes the way that human societies interact with each other. What that means is everybody uses natural resources, but not everybody has the same amount of them, right? And because of that, human societies interact in three main ways. The first two deal with what happens when there aren't enough natural resources, when they are scarce. Human societies tend to compete for scarce resources, leading to military conflict, aka war. In other words, if I'm from a strong society and you're from a weak society, but you have what I need, I might go fight you and take your stuff. Second, some states seek to expand their access to resources by conquering other states and creating empires. An empire is a large state constructed when a strong state conquers a weaker state and claims it. So like, not only have we gone to war and I've taken your stuff, but I'm also taking all of your land and you belong to me now. Over here, we've got a picture of classical empires like Rome and the Han Dynasty of China, and all of them were built because they started out with a strong military. They wanted resources from neighboring cultures, so they expanded, conquered, and took them, and now look how big they are. Empires are a huge theme in world history. It's most of what we study, so if you remember this definition now, you will set yourself up to have an easier time in high school social studies. So that's what happens when there are not enough natural resources. Sometimes, though, there's more than what we need. A surplus is when you have more of a given thing than you need. So when there is a surplus of a resource in a region, people tend to sell that surplus using trade networks. And if you look back at this map, you'll see like not only do we have giant empires, but we've got some trade networks like the Silk Roads here. The Silk Roads were a system of networks that connected the Han Dynasty of China all the way over here with the Roman Empire all the way over here. So not only did these empires get big enough by like conquering other places for their resources, they ended up with extra resources and they then used to trade with each other. Similarly, we've got the Mali and Ghana Empire over here that are connected by a bunch of trade routes. And here's what they traded. It's pretty cool. We are gonna stop here because I have to go to a meeting, but thank you for being a part of this first part of my Unit 1 tutorial.